The morning of the shareholder vote, my business partner stood up in front of the entire board and said my name like it was an inconvenience. Diane was never more than an assistant here. Let's not pretend otherwise. Nobody in that room corrected him. Nobody except me, and I didn't say a word. I just opened my laptop, connected it to the screen at the front of the room, and let 14 years of paperwork speak for itself. My name is Diane Whitfield. I'm 44 years old, and the last thing my business partner said to me before I ended 20 years of friendship was, "You'll walk away with a thank you card and nothing else." He laughed when he said it. He'd already had the locks on the downtown office changed. He thought that was the end of the story. It wasn't. To understand how we got to that boardroom, you have to go back to a folding table in my parents' garage, 14 years earlier. Before we go deeper into the story, please take a moment to like and subscribe. If you have a second, drop a comment and tell me where you are listening from and what time it is there. It means more than you know. Marcus Reyes and I met in a night class on small business accounting. He was loud, funny, and full of ideas that sounded impossible. I was quiet, methodical, and good at making impossible things add up. When he told me he wanted to start a specialty coffee roasting company, everyone in his life told him to get a real job first. I told him I'd help him build the spreadsheets. We started Cobalt Roasting Co. with $11,000. 6 of it was mine. For the first 4 years, there was no salary worth mentioning. Marcus roasted beans in a rented warehouse space that smelled like burnt toast every single morning. I kept the books, ran the deliveries, negotiated with our first 3 coffee shop clients, and worked a second job doing freelance bookkeeping to cover both our rents when the business account ran dry. We had an agreement, spoken plainly across that folding table, 50-50, on paper and in practice, for as long as the company existed. I never asked him to put it in writing. That was my first mistake. It would not be my last mistake, but it would be the only one that almost cost me everything. The lean years were brutal in ways people who haven't lived them don't understand. I remember a January where we had $400 in the business account and a wholesale order due in 6 days. I remember driving my own car 12 hours round trip to pick up a shipment of green coffee because the freight company wanted cash we didn't have. I remember telling Marcus more times than I can count, "We're not quitting. We're too close." And we always were close, just never quite there. Then, in year 6, a regional grocery chain picked up our medium roast as a house brand. Overnight, orders that used to take us a month to fill needed to happen in a week. We hired our first real staff. We opened a second roasting facility. Marcus started doing interviews. A food magazine ran a profile on him with the headline, "The Man Behind Cobalt's Rise." My name did not appear in the article. I told myself it didn't matter. The business mattered. Success did something to Marcus that failure never had. He stopped asking what I thought about expansion decisions and started informing me of them after the fact. He brought on a strategic advisor, a slick man named Trent, who wore better suits than either of us could afford and who, within a few months, was sitting in on meetings I wasn't invited to. I raised it once, carefully over coffee we hadn't paid retail for in years. I feel like I'm finding out about decisions after they're made. "You worry too much," Marcus said. "I'm just moving fast. That's what growth looks like." I wanted to believe him. I'd wanted to believe him for 14 years, and old habits don't unlearn themselves in a single conversation. But small things kept surfacing. A new operating agreement circulated for signature that quietly reduced my ownership stake from 50% to 30%, buried in language about founder incentive restructuring. I didn't sign it. Marcus told me it was a formality everyone was doing and that I was overreacting. Then I found the deck. Trent had left a laptop open in the small conference room, and on the screen was a fundraising presentation for a new holding company, Cobalt Brands Group, listing Marcus as sole founder and CEO. My name wasn't on a single slide. Not in the history section, not in the leadership section, not anywhere. I closed the laptop and went back to my desk and did what I have always done when the ground shifts under me. I started gathering paper. It took 3 weeks of quiet work to understand the full shape of it. Marcus and Trent were preparing to take outside investment into the new holding company, restructure Cobalt entirely, and Through a set of transfers, I eventually traced through 6 different filings, moved the original company's assets, contracts, and brand into an entity where my name appeared nowhere at all. I overheard the final piece by accident, standing outside Marcus's office with a stack of invoices. Trent's voice, low. Once the vote goes through, her stake dissolves into common shares of the old entity. The old entity gets wound down. She's holding paper in a company that won't exist. Marcus's voice, quieter. She built half of this. She built half of a coffee company. You're building something else now. I stood in that hallway for a long time, not shaking, not crying, just standing there, understanding finally, completely, that the man I had trusted with 14 years of unpaid overtime and second mortgages and missed holidays had already decided, somewhere along the way, that my part of the story was over. I didn't confront him that day. I went home, sat at my kitchen table, the same kind of table where Cobalt had started, and I made a decision. If he had already written me out of the story in his own mind, I wasn't going to spend one more day begging for a role in it. The next morning, I called an attorney named Patricia Nkemelu, who specialized in exactly this kind of thing. Founders quietly squeezed out of the companies they built. "How much documentation do you have?" Patricia asked in our first meeting. I set a banker's box on her desk. Bank transfers, personal loan statements, emails going back to year 1, text messages where Marcus thanked me for covering payroll, photos of handwritten ledgers from the folding table days, because I have never in my life thrown away a piece of paper that mattered. Patricia went quiet for a moment, flipping through it. "Diane, this isn't a messy dispute. This is a paper trail a first-year law student could win with. I didn't want to fight in the press. I didn't want a public war with a man I'd once considered my closest friend. I wanted the truth on the record, in a room where it couldn't be talked over or laughed off." Patricia and I built a case not around accusations, but around dates. A quiet, exhaustive, unimpeachable timeline. Word got back to me, the way it always does, that Marcus was telling people the split was already settled. Diane's going to get a nice consulting fee and move on. She was never really a founder, not on paper. Trent had apparently drafted language for the press release already. I let them believe it. I kept showing up to work every day, calm, professional, gathering nothing new because I no longer needed to. I had what I needed. I was simply waiting for the room where it would matter. The shareholder vote was scheduled in the same boardroom where Cobalt had signed its first grocery chain contract. A small irony I don't think Marcus noticed. He arrived in a new suit, Trent beside him, 3 investors from the new holding company seated along the back wall like an audience already expecting the ending. Marcus stood first. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "Before we vote, I want to be clear about the history here. Diane has been an important part of the operational side of this business, but Cobalt's vision, its growth, its brand, that's been my work. I think it's time our ownership structure reflected that reality." He paused, and then, almost gently, almost like he believed it was a kindness, "Diane was never more than an assistant here. Let's not pretend otherwise." The room was silent in the particular way rooms go silent when everyone is deciding whether to be complicit. I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I opened my laptop and connected it to the screen at the front of the room. "I'd like the board to see something before we vote," I said, not an argument. Just a timeline. The first slide was a photo of the original folding table, with a scanned copy of our handwritten founding agreement beside it, 50-50, dated, both our signatures, notarized the following week at my insistence, a fact Marcus had clearly forgotten I'd bothered to do. The second slide was a chart of every capital contribution for the first 4 years. Mine, highlighted, made up 61% of it. The third slide was the freight run I made in my own car. The fourth was a photo of my old bookkeeping invoices, showing 18 months where I paid myself nothing so payroll would clear. Then came the emails. I put one on the screen and let it sit there. "I couldn't have gotten Cobalt through the first 3 years without you. Whatever this becomes, it's half yours. Always." I looked at Marcus for the first time since I'd stood up. "You wrote that in year 2. He didn't answer. The final slides were the ones Patricia and I had spent the most time on. The new holding company's incorporation documents. the asset transfer filings, and the fundraising deck, the one with my name missing from every slide, dated 3 weeks before that morning's vote, proving the restructuring had been planned well before it was ever disclosed to me. One of the investors in the back row leaned toward another and said, not quietly enough, "This is a fraudulent transfer exposure. This whole deal is dead. The board's outside counsel asked for a recess before any vote proceeded. It took another 6 weeks of review before anything was finalized. I didn't spend those weeks celebrating. 20 years of friendship doesn't end painlessly just because you were right." When the review concluded, the findings were clean and unemotional, exactly the way I'd hoped. My original 50% stake was confirmed and protected. The attempted restructuring was voided. The holding company deal collapsed once investors saw the asset transfer had never been properly disclosed to a full owner. Trent left before the ink on the ruling was dry. Marcus and I met once more, in Patricia's conference room, to finalize the buyout terms we ultimately agreed on. He kept Cobalt. I took a fair valuation of my share and walked away clean. "I convinced myself I built it alone," he said, near the end, not quite looking at me. "It was easier than admitting how much of it was you." "I know," I said. And I meant it. There was no anger left to spend on him, just the quiet relief of finally being seen, even 3 weeks too late to matter to the friendship, but exactly in time to matter to the truth. I used my settlement to start something new. A small consulting firm helping first-time founders set up their equity agreements properly. In writing from day one, before trust is the only thing holding a partnership together. My first client was a woman roasting coffee out of her garage with a business partner she trusted completely. I didn't tell her not to trust him. I told her to write it down anyway. People sometimes ask if I regret not fighting Marcus in public, not naming him in the press, not letting the story get louder than it needed to be. I don't. I never wanted to win an argument. I wanted the truth on the record, in the room where it counted, in a form nobody could talk over. The paperwork didn't make me a founder. I already was one. It just made sure, finally, that everyone in the room had to admit it.